Many things have been said and published on this platform about Max Payne 3. Many of them are even better than my own contribution perhaps. It's not like that ever stopped me before, so there is no reason to ignore the game's 10th anniversary. At least that's one of the reasons why it's been a year since I covered the series' second installment, so it's not the case of me never playing it. I'm just putting this out there before I'm mistaken for being a purist who didn't want anything to do with Rockstar's edition. I could somewhat understand the reluctance that followed the news of Remedy not being involved in its production. The first two Max Paynes were special games, for the lack of a better word. The action made them emblematic, but Sam Lake's writing made them iconic experiences. Not many titles can evoke such depth of thoughts and feelings, mainly due to their uniquely distinct writing style. Rockstar and Dan Houser have a reputation for good stories, but they're not Remedy. I'm not going to slap the classical twist of "but hey, they managed to prove everyone wrong," because that's not the case here. Max Payne 3 is not a Remedy game in style, and it never attempts to do this. Does this mean that I think they failed to make a worthy sequel? On the contrary. I'm tempted to jump straight to the gameplay and leave all the writing and story aspects for the last half of the video, but I simply can't. The first ideas regarding gameplay are already intertwined with the story, thus I'll have to oblige and follow a similar structure to a certain extent. As a side remark, if you were to consider gameplay to be a game's body and the story its soul, me saying they're tough to separate should be an early sign of how much I regard Max Payne 3. The events take place nearly a decade after the second game. Max is in a much worse state than the last time around, but he's doing his substance abuse from the position of a personal bodyguard for a wealthy businessman in Sao Paulo, so all's not that bad, right? Well, since the video isn't over yet, it means that you guessed correctly and things go bad right away. While on the job at a penthouse party, gang members bust in and attempt to kidnap Max's employer, said wealthy businessman. Max makes short work of these goons, even as boozed and drugged up as he is. But the mysteries are about to pop in left and right, with the wife kidnapped a few days later after a nightclub shootout, and the following ransom exchange is interrupted by an unknown third party. Some things are pretty evident already. Firstly, the story is conveyed somewhat differently from previous Max Paynes. Gone are the comic book stills Remedy employed. Now the story is being told with the help of stylized cinematics. The Rockstar touch to them is pretty apparent. Characters are lively, they move around the scenes regardless if they're in the foreground or the background, and lots of details can be noticed if you pay attention. Anyone who played Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption will recognize many of these elements, but there's a trade-off: they are long as hell and not entirely skippable. This is a widespread complaint, and for a good reason. I get it, the cinematics are used to hide loading screens and make the transitions between levels appear seamless. It 100% achieves the latter goal, but that's not what the issue many people were upset about. The issue is that they take forever and cannot be skipped at all. When this happened in 2012, I blamed it on the hard drives the vast majority of gamers used back then. Remember the days before SSDs when loading screens were measured in minutes and not seconds? Well, Rockstar used this commonly expressed logic to sweep the issue under the rug. Sure, loading times were still too long for a game with linear self-contained levels, but nevertheless, it looked good, so there were mitigating circumstances, right? Well, now imagine my surprise when, in 2022, a much more powerful system with SSDs and NVMe drives exhibits the same behavior. No, really, I tried it by moving the game's folder around. It's all the same, unskippable. It's only after using a mod that enables skipping the cutscenes that I fully realized that Rockstar was just pulling the wool over our eyes all along. Not skipping the cutscenes was a deliberate choice on their part, something that I find very hard to explain or justify. Yes, the cutscenes are good for reasons that I'm yet to talk about, but I don't see why a player should not have the option to skip them. To make matters worse, subsequent playthroughs still won't allow skipping the cutscenes. So you better enjoy them because you're forced to watch them in their entirety every time you replay the game. It made me less willing to replay the campaign, and it's a shame because it's absolutely terrific. After the failed ransom payment, Max's fortunes turn from bad to worse. First, he fights to the skin of his teeth to rescue his employer's wife, only to lose her at the last moment. Going back to report to the bereaved husband, his company's headquarters get attacked, blown up, and he ends up dead. Slowly realizing that he's being set up, Max finally snaps and produces one of the most iconic moments of the game by shaving his hair off and sobering up after God knows how long. But this simple description doesn't do the moment enough justice. When the first teaser screenshots came out, one of the most common reactions was to joke at the image of a bald-headed Max sporting a thick beard and a dad bod while blasting his way through the Brazilian favelas. It was assumed that this was just a lazy way to portray him as an older guy. Haha, an old guy equals bald, what a hilarious twist. But in one of the rare moments where people are proving wrong, and no Kojima, this isn't something you've pulled off, you fucking weirdo, this moment is crucial in his character development. And it's not about the hair either. Before I go into this, I want to say that I'm not an alcoholic, never was, and hopefully don't plan to become one soon. At most, I've had some wild nights that left me unable to walk straight anymore, but nothing close to it being a habit. If you want to hear the perspectives of what I hope to be for their sakes recovered alcoholics, the internet offers plenty of alternatives. Many swear that Max Payne 3's portrayal of alcoholism is one of the most faithful in fiction, so I chose to believe them in that regard. A lot of attention is paid to the influence of alcoholism on Max's actions and decisions throughout the story. It starts with very subtle details peppered in cutscenes and regular gameplay, with flashes of lights and colors at seemingly random moments. Sometimes it's a sudden change of light in the room that triggers it, or a sudden sound that captures the attention, or an important detail from a conversation, a remark that catches his interest. All these don't sound like anything special, but most of the game's events are perceived by someone too drunk to be able to focus. Ever been so drunk that the moment you thought you heard a complex argument, you chose to ignore it because you felt totally unable to follow its logic? This is what the cutscenes are trying to convey. The details found in cutscenes are increased tenfold once you realize those sudden flashes are purposeful and give you lots of hints. The same goes for the random words that pop during cutscenes, as if to show the details Max notices but can't really grasp due to the state he's in. This becomes even more obvious in the flashback levels, which show how he left New York to work for his current boss and his inability to put things together. Yes, Max is being played, but the alcohol abuse dulled his senses so much that he can't make sense of all the clues he can spot. The moment the subtle whispers turn into roaringly clear messages, Max realizes the cost of his own addiction and how others use it against him. He sobers up, and the effects look more like hangover than drunkenness for the rest of the game. Him cutting his hair is the embodiment of a man who got sick of everything and wants to start over, to take control back. I can certainly see why this moment resonates with so many people going through addiction and any other form of staring into abyss. The feeling of empowerment is there, it's very hard to miss it in fact. As I said, the hair's not above the hair. With his newfound outlook on things, Max goes deep into the favelas to rescue the wife of his now dead employer and search for answers. Needless to say, he's not at all welcome there, and a lot of shooting occurs as expected. He achieves seeing the wife executed, the brother-in-law killed horrendously, and gets into a shootout with the equivalent of the SWAT team who raided the favelas to indiscriminately kill and abduct people. What catches Max's eyes is that the policemen are selling captured civilians to one of the local gangs. The answer to this mystery leads into Max Payne 3's darkest moment. Reaching an abandoned hotel where people were being dropped off, he soon realizes that the purpose for their presence there is organ harvesting. The moment when Max finds all these people cut up and left literally in pieces feels like a punch in the gut. I guess this moment is as good as any to open this subject, so let's get to it. People complained a lot over the years about Max Payne 3 not being true to the older games. This has happened ever since it got announced, and there are a couple of reasons why they might feel like this. First, let's get the noir topic out of the way by recommending you watch a very in-depth video about this subject made by Summer of Mark, who I have never met in my life and thus have no reasons to keep mentioning in my videos. Anyway, what he has to say on Max Payne 3 still being a noir is spot on and in greater detail than I ever could. What I can say from my own perspective is that the Panama level does an outstanding job of nailing the atmosphere of a Central American shady business gone very wrong. As such, it's one of the most atmospheric levels, even if moments like the airport gunfight at the end of the story are the most well known out of them. So now we're left with the writing style and Max's characters to discuss. One of the main pillars of Max Payne is the subject of depression caused by the sudden loss of his wife and child. Sam Lake's approach was very personal, almost intimate in a way. Max's thoughts are strung along a long thread of metaphors and expressions, all focused on communicating the pain he goes through on the inside. The depression is portrayed in a way it looks like a black, thick fog that surrounds Max at every turn. His perception of what's around him is trapped. Whatever he can observe is as if it's seen through this thick shroud. The outward manifestation of this depression is very much toned down in comparison. He doesn't discuss his feelings with other people beyond some dry remarks, and his interactions with other characters are as regular as they could be within the storyline. Only the mess he keeps in his own apartment clues other people about his state, and in Max Payne 2 it's actually a different character that mentions Max is an alcoholic. Otherwise, there are very subtle clues that point in this direction, but nothing outright explicit. On the other hand, Dan Houser's style is not like this at all. Max still mentions his own perception of things, but everything is more observational. That depression is still there, of course, but it doesn't seem to permeate as much in how he sees everything around him beyond an extra layer of cynicism. In Max Payne 3 there are significantly more social references and observations. He mentions the wealth inequality between Sao Paulo's rich and the poor, the social life of football has-beens, the misery of the favelas and how Americans are perceived in Brazil, among many others. If you're used to Sam Lake's Max, this version looks like he's been cured of his extreme depressed-induced perceptual myopia. From a certain point onward, it contradicts what I said about alcohol abuse dulling his mind, and I have to say, it's true, the contradiction is there. The portrayal of his addiction is a lot more in your face, and the level of alcoholism displayed genuinely reaches levels that can be hard to watch for some people. While the inner monologue Sam Lake's Max produced were darker, Houser's Max certainly has a way more intense outward display of his depression. Houser has always been able to write incisive, straight-to-the-point social commentary into his games, and while it's welcome here, it does make the discrepancy to Sam Lake stand out more. The metaphors are more or less absent and replaced with allegories that lack the same subtlety past Max Payne titles offered. I mean, yeah, okay, Sam Lake isn't exactly the king of subtle writing, but when you see Max confront the leaders of the organ harvesting operation, threaten to detonate the entire building while screaming, "You're turning humans into glue!" I'm reasonably sure who holds the sledgehammer in this relationship. In a moment where an absolutely horrific thing is revealed, this approach misses the mark in the execution of what's supposed to be an infuriated Max getting ready for the third act of the story. The random words popping on the screen during cutscenes all over the game enforces this lack of subtlety. But Hauser's approach has a significant advantage because he offers Max a genuinely good character arc. Don't get me wrong, Max has his own growth in the first two games, but they don't have the same depth and variation. The first game is too short and plays out more like a typical revenge story, while the second presents some dilemmas he's forced to solve. But in Max Payne 3, we first see Max at the lowest depths of his addiction during his flashback levels, followed by a bodyguard that's constantly drunk on the job to the point he's unable to realize what's going on around him, and then, forced by the increasingly dire circumstances, he pushes on until he reaches the point where he ditches his alcohol addiction entirely to finally get some control back in his life. And once he can put all the pieces together, Max strikes against all those who have wronged him with more focus than he's ever had since long time ago. Hauser isn't at the first decent character arc either. Niko Bellic in GTA 4 and Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2 are just two prominent examples of this not just being an accident. And with this whole parenthesis being said, do I think Max Payne 3 is a true Max Payne? I have to say yes. I know that there are purists that will not accept this in any way, shape or form, and that's okay, but I feel that the core themes are covered over the entire series, albeit with the different ways to approach them. As a personal note, each game had a special place in my heart growing up, as both the second and the third game came out during the darker moments of my own life. The second was released when I was a very impressionable teenager, struggling with my own issues, as you'd expect from a teenager. Max's metaphors and inwards-oriented expression of sadness were very appealing, since this was how I looked towards myself, by choice or otherwise. Max Payne 3 came out as I was in a downward spiral of confusion and loneliness as a young adult, with a sprinkle of disappointments to accelerate it. Max's cynicism and bitterness were something I understood, since they were common feelings for me at the time. Since I was more in touch with the outside world by that moment, his remarks about others and society were closer to home. Although it has to be said that playing it now 10 years later, I gained a better understanding and appreciation for them. Even if that monologue that starts and ends the game is awkwardly constructed, almost out of place. I don't have a crystal ball to guess my teenage self's exact impression over Max Payne 3 or how I would have liked the second game as a young adult, but I'm sure the two stories are from the same cloth, even if the sewing techniques differ. When it comes to the quality of gameplay, it's very evident right from the start that we're dealing with high quality stuff. In all honesty, this can be said about any Rockstar game starting with GTA 4, and I only mention it because there is a similar feel to it to a certain extent. Of course, it's more focused on precision than GTA, so the aptest comparison would be with Red Dead Redemption 2. This includes using the Euphoria physics engine for characters, giving all shootouts an extra immersive edge. Shooting an enemy in the right spot can send him tumbling to the ground, and the way models try to grab things as they fall is always fascinating. The same thing happens to Max when it comes to shoot dodging, which is essentially a nerf to the ability. You can't do it as freely anymore because now, if you touch an object in mid-air, you'll just trip and exit bullet time because of it. It's annoying until you get used to it, but has the added benefit of forcing you to be a bit more thoughtful when you do it. The best way is to jump into cover, because if there are still enemies alive after you land, you're in a world of hurt, since Rockstar decided to make Max more sluggish when doing these shooting acrobatics. It fits the style they employed since GTA 4, but it also benefits from perfectly matching Max's condition. He's older, drunk and constantly on painkillers, no wonder he's not as spry as he used to be. And speaking about being spry, let's talk about movement. Actually, let's talk about the cover mechanics. Max Payne 3 has the option to use this, and it's a weird choice. Not in the sense that it goes against what people think about Max Payne, but that it's a trap. Do you think it's a coincidence there's not much footage of me using it during fights? I played the game multiple times over the years and my hardest playthrough was on the lowest difficulty among the rest, solely because I kept using this feature. The game tricks you into thinking that cover mechanic protects you and offers you an advantage. In reality though, using cover nails you into place, which is the worst thing you can do in this game. Once you figure that out, the game opens up tremendously. The good old-fashioned run and gun can efficiently deal with the biggest fights. You still need to know how to move, but on average, you're way safer while on the move than rooted in place behind some waist-high wall. There's a weapon carry limitation which I'm not necessarily a fan of, but I can put aside to a certain extent. The arsenal is more or less not very relevant since the game really encourages you to headshot all enemies on the screen as quickly as possible to avoid being overwhelmed. Most guns are equally adept at doing this. This is partly due to how aggressive bullet time is in intensity, giving you enough opportunity to click heads to your heart's content if you've got enough juice to keep it going. One thing that annoys me the most is the game forcefully changing the equipped weapon after every little cutscene. I get it, Max looks cooler while walking inside a room with a pistol rather than a large rifle. But for the love of God, why must you force me to manually re-equip it during the fight that triggers by the end of it? This kind of railroading philosophy attracted multiple criticisms in GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, and here at least we're talking about a linear game. But still very annoying regardless. And if I'm still at the chapter of shitting on the game, I'll add another one to the list. The last stand mechanic is repetitive, decreases the difficulty, and is quite janky sometimes. Basically, whenever you're supposed to die, the game consumes a painkiller and your entire bullet time bar to give you a chance to kill your shooter and come out with full health. On higher difficulties, where dying often is the name of the game, this results in getting this very steep bullet time followed by Max dropping to the ground and having to get back up, thus unable to manually move and shoot over and over again. And if your enemy is somehow behind cover, you're left with this painfully long bullet time that you can't skip for a quick reload. As you might have guessed by now, I really don't like this feature, mainly since the game already uses other crutches to help you if you die a lot. If you keep failing a section, you can already get more painkillers and full healing on reload, which I feel would have been enough. So not only it's not a good feature, but it's also redundant. Multiplayer is also present here. Unfortunately, 10 years later, it's not a feature I'd recommend too much since the rest of the implementation is entirely forgettable. The game modes are relatively generic and it uses a Call of Duty style of progression, meaning that if you were to start playing today, the few people you'd still meet on the servers would simply mop the floor with you because they unlocked everything. It's not the reason why you'd purchase this 10 years after its release anyway. But make no mistake, there is no question that Max Payne 3 is worth it solely for the single player experience. I mean hell, the campaign alone can be played on and on because it's so well done. The arcade and time attack modes are just the cherry on top. All I can say is that if you haven't already played it, do so. If you're a Remedy Max Payne fan that's on the fence, despite what I said earlier about being okay to have a different opinion, please reconsider and give it a chance. Sam Lake cannot be imitated or replaced, but Dan Houser certainly understood what a Max Payne story needed to work and did so in his own style. The gameplay makes it one of the tightest action shooters out there and is something that must be played by fans of the genre regardless if they are interested in the story. If you really don't care about the story, just get the cinematic skipping mod and go wild. Thanks to everyone for hanging around. This month will be fun since this is not the only anniversary that I intend to cover. What can I say? May is a very fruitful month for gaming in general. Just as fruitful as liking, subscribing and sharing with like-minded fellows would be, dare I say. Until next time, cheers!